Welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this because we are looking at a absolutely fascinating intersection of law, farming, and community rights. On one hand, we've got the state of Maine. Now, they're a massive pioneer in the local food sovereignty movement, really championing the rights of individuals to produce and consume the food they actually want. But on the exact opposite hand, we have the strict, non-negotiable realities of federal food safety regulations, specifically when we're talking about processing poultry on the farm. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly where local freedom ends and federal compliance begins, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get started.
Here is our path for today's explainer. We're going to start with the baseline of local control, look at the meat exclusion, map out the federal poultry tiers, break down the specific rules for 1,000 birds, and finally, look at enforcement and records.
All right, Section 1, the baseline of local control, understanding Maine's food sovereignty. Let's really establish what local control over a food system actually looks like up in Maine.
So this definition right here is really the heart of Maine's legislative efforts. Food sovereignty is literally about handing regulatory authority over local food systems directly back to the residents of municipalities. It's a localized power shift. This whole movement gained major traction with the 2017 Maine Food Sovereignty Act. And it actually went so far that in 2021, Maine voters overwhelmingly ratified a constitutional right to food, literally enshrining an individual's right to grow, raise, harvest, produce, and consume food of their own choosing.
What this means in practical terms is that municipalities can adopt local ordinances that actually supersede certain state food laws. So this allows small-scale producers to sell things like, raw milk, produce, or home-cooked foods directly to their neighbors without any state interference or licensure. The whole goal is to foster economic resilience and really prioritize traditional agricultural practices over sweeping industrial mandates. And for a lot of homesteaders, this feels like an incredible victory for self-reliance. But as we're about to see, that self-reliance hits a hard brick wall when feathers get involved.
Which brings us to Section 2, the hard line on meat, why poultry is excluded from sovereignty. This is where the local freedom we were just talking about is no longer a blanket exemption.
And this brilliantly illustrates the divide that honestly catches so many homesteaders completely off guard. When you look at produce and dairy, those low-risk foods are covered safely under local sovereignty. But meat and poultry? They sit in an entirely different, strictly regulated bucket. And why is that? Well, it all comes down to the inherent, documented food safety hazards associated with processing meat. The state and federal governments cooperate to maintain very specific minimum health standards for these products, meaning a local town ordinance simply cannot and does not override federal meat and poultry laws.
I love the backstory on this exact quote. Up in Maine, they call this the one-sentence fix. See, back when the original food sovereignty bill passed, the USDA stepped in and essentially threatened the state. They said, look, if you allow unregulated meat processing, we are going to shut down the entire Maine meat inspection program. Now, that would have forced slaughterhouses across the entire state to close their doors, absolutely devastating the rural agricultural economy. So to save the program, the governor called an emergency session, and this specific sentence was quickly added to ensure that meat and poultry remained firmly, securely under state and federal jurisdiction.
Moving right along to Section 3, federal poultry exemption tiers. Operating outside continuous inspection. If your local town's sovereignty laws don't cover your backyard chickens, what actually does?
Let's look at the federal pathways that allow you to operate legally. The modern framework for on-farm poultry processing goes way back to 1968. Now, under normal circumstances, processing meat legally requires continuous bird-by-bird inspection by an official USDA inspector. But recognizing that's not feasible for everyone, the law created exemptions specifically for small-scale producer-growers. It's broken into a few tiers, specifically an under 1,000 bird exemption and an under 20,000 bird exemption. These tiers allow you to process your own birds on your own premises without having a daily inspector literally standing over your shoulder, provided you meet some very strict criteria.
So the crucial point is the number 1,000. For the vast majority of homesteaders and small-scale farmers who are just looking to supply their immediate local community or maybe a small CSA program, the 1,000 bird exemption is the magic number. It's by far the absolute most accessible pathway.
Section 4, Rules for 1,000 birds, the 5 strict criteria for compliance. Listen closely here, because we are going to break down exactly what it takes to legally operate under this specific tier.
Okay, here's the fine print. If you miss even one of these 5 criteria, you lose the exemption. Poof, gone. First, you can slaughter absolutely no more than 1,000 healthy birds of your own raising within a calendar year. Second, no outside buying or selling. You cannot buy or sell poultry products other than those raised on your own farm. So, no, you cannot process your neighbor's chickens for them no matter how nicely they ask. Third, your processing setup has to meet strict sanitary standards so the food remains sound, clean, and unadulterated. Fourth, you have to keep highly accurate records. And fifth, your products absolutely under no circumstances can cross state lines.
I really want to highlight this point because it's a super common misconception that can literally get farmers into serious legal trouble. The 1,000 bird limit applies per farm location. It is not per person. Let's say you, your spouse, and your brother are all raising chickens on the exact same piece of property. The USDA looks at that and considers the entire location as a single farm, which caps the collective total for everyone at exactly 1,000 birds. You don't suddenly get 3,000 birds because there are 3 of you. Exceeding that collective total is a direct violation of the exemption.
Okay, our final section, Section 5, Enforcement and Operations, keeping your farm legal. Let's talk about what you actually have to execute, on paper, to stay compliant.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how brutally clear the boundaries of commerce are defined, especially if you look at that interstate sales column. Whether you are processing 50 birds or 19,000 birds under these producer exemptions, the rule is identical. Crossing state borders is strictly prohibited. If it's an uninspected, exempt product, it absolutely must stay within the state it was processed in. If you ever want to sell across state lines, the only legal pathway for that is full, continuous, daily USDA inspection.
And to prove you are operating legally within your state, your paperwork has to be flawless. Remember, you aren't exempt from the law, you are just exempt from the continuous physical presence of an inspector. State and federal officials absolutely can review your operation, and when they do, you are required to produce detailed flock records, precise slaughter logs, and sales receipts to verify you stayed well under that 1,000 bird limit. Oh, and these records? They must be legible and kept for a minimum of 2 years. Without these logs, you simply cannot prove your compliance.
Which naturally brings us to our final and most important question. Does your poultry operation actually meet all federal exemption criteria? Because as we've explored today, having local food sovereignty in your town is a massive, incredible win for self-reliance, but it does not act as a magic shield against federal meat and poultry regulations. You still have to play by the federal rules when it comes to processing those birds. I highly encourage you to audit your own homestead or farm operations this week just to ensure you're safely and legally nourishing your community. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.